It's just not practical, and it's just super structured. It's like 2 hours.
And welcome you to our third semi-annual Disciple Scholar Lecture. We're pleased to hear from Scott, Professor Scott Sanders in a few minutes. I'm Lance Erickson. I am conducting today. I'm a professor in the sociology department, and I'm conducting because I'm chair of the committee that's the undergrad outreach committee that, among other things, organizes this lecture series. As we get started, I want to thank our department secretary, Margaret McCabe, and our student assistants, Tessa Swenson, Cooper King, and Katya McClendon, for the work that they've done in helping us get this organized and prepare. There's going to be some refreshments afterwards, so we'll appreciate them for that as well. I want to recognize other members of the committee, including Dr. Jane Lopez and Dr. Stan Knapp, who have made important contributions to this series. Our thoughts and prayers go out to Stan. As many of you know, he's having a health issue, and we pray for his family that things will go well. I just want to say a few words about the lecture and why we're doing this. So our department chair, Curtis Child, he came up with this idea a couple years ago, and it wasn't because of Elder Holland's conference talk, his university conference talk in fall of 2021, but it dovetails really well with that, and the timing's fairly similar, so we'll kind of use that as a jumping off point. If you forgot what his talk was about, he said in so many words, and not so many words I should say, that the brethren needed faculty at BYU to not take shots towards Salt Lake, but to be supportive, to help students develop their testimonies as they learn their disciplines. Now, some of the faculty at the time were a little upset by his talk, and they felt like he was taking shots at them, and they took it a little personally. And as a department faculty, we got together, and we talked about this, and as we did, we felt like he must have been talking to somebody else. We felt like we were doing exactly what he was suggesting we should be doing, helping our students, trying to help them develop testimonies and deal with issues that they encounter as they learn sociology. Now, we realized as we did this that for the most part, this happens in informal ways in our offices, often one-on-one. And so our development of a lecture series to talk about discipline and scholarship and discipleship is at least a tacit admission that we needed to do something formal and to do something a little more organized. And so that's what we're doing here today. So it gives on a semester by semester basis one of our faculty a chance to express in a public forum how they have grappled with discipleship and scholarship and how they continue to grapple with. And I think I deliberately use a present tense here in terms of grappling with these two things because I don't think that we'll ever be done grappling with the secular and the spiritual in our lives, our scholarship and our discipleship. And so we hope that as you listen today, that you'll learn something. Professor Sanders has a lot to offer us in this regard. So that's what I wanted to say. We hope that you join us as well in this lifelong pursuit of becoming disciple scholars. Riley Haight has agreed to offer our opening prayer today. After the prayer, Melissa Jones, who was our last disciple scholar, will introduce Professor Sanders, and following her will be the lecture, and we'll go to that point.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful for this opportunity to gather together today. We ask Thee that we can be able to learn and have things that we can have our questions answered with and learn how to become better disciples. We are grateful for this opportunity, and we ask thee that thy Spirit can attend us here. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Hi, everyone. It is my sincere pleasure to introduce this semester's Disciple Scholar Lecturer, Dr. Scott Sanders. Dr. Sanders is an associate professor of sociology. He received his PhD in sociology from Cornell University in 2013. His research interests focus on at-risk populations, particularly manifested in rural populations both in the US and globally, including access to services and labor in global production markets. Dr. Sanders is also interested in evaluation methods for international markets. Evaluation methods for international development programs. He is currently the director of the Project Evaluation and Team Assessment, also known as PEAT, here at BYU. PEAT trains students in evaluation and assessment techniques that contracts their services to non-governmental organizations across the globe. He has assisted with program evaluations in 23 countries. Dr. Sanders is also the executive director and treasurer of the Rural Sociological Society. Beyond his research expertise and experience, Dr. Sanders and his wife Jen have 3 children and a really cute dog. He enjoys cycling, skiing, running, and traveling. Some fun facts: Dr. Sanders has been blessed by the Dalai Lama twice with peace. Like, that's a pretty big deal. He once dived into a mosh pit at a punk rock concert, and this was just last year, right? Yeah, Friday, that's right. I have known Scott for almost 5 years, and I can truly say he is one of the kindest, most thoughtful people you will ever meet. And I believe he truly exemplifies what it means to be a true disciple of Jesus Christ, and we are very blessed to hear from him today. I'm now going to turn the time over to Scott.
Can you all hear me? Okay. So I served my mission in northern Philippines on the island of Luzon. I spent most of my days literally hiking through the jungle to go to teach in small little villages where the villagers were mostly subsistent farmers. And it was there when I was talking one day with a villager, with a farmer, and he said something to me that just shook me spiritually and disrupted me intellectually for over 15 years. Something I just couldn't reconcile for a long time. And that happened in the village of Salapasap. Now, Salapasap is about 2 miles outside the main town of Cabugao, and we'd either hike out or hitchhike out about 2 or 3 miles out before we got to a dirt path. And we'd take that path and we'd go through a large bamboo forest. And after we got over a ridge, it would open up into a valley that looked like this. A series of small rice paddies that households would grow for their food. There are 2 crops a year in Salapasap. The first crop was rice, and that was entirely consumed by the household. It wasn't something they would sell. That's what they used to live off of. And the second would be a cash crop. In Salapasap, it was tobacco. So that was what they'd have for their second harvest, and then they would sell that for their income and money to buy other things. And Salapasap was a little village where you had this rice paddies, and you had the bamboo huts and some cinder block huts, about 150 people before it opened up to the South China Sea. And it was just a lovely place full of kind, hardworking people. When I was there, it was still water buffalo and manual labor for all the agriculture. It wasn't mechanized at the time. Again, just small yields, people working super hard just to make ends meet. And one day we were coming into the valley and it looked like this. It was starting to turn yellow and brown. The problem was it was about a month before the harvest was supposed to happen. Right? And so I grew up, I was from Delta, my grandfather sold tractors, so talking about the harvest was just kind of like what we did all the time growing up. And so talking to Bishop Aguilara, he was the farmer there and the leader in the village, and I asked him, so what's going on with the rice? What's going on with the crop? And he said, well, if it doesn't rain soon, it's going to fail. I said, okay, well, what's going to happen then? Like, who's going to come help? And he looked me in the eye and he said, the village will starve, no one will come help us, no one cares about us. I grew up in a world where if we worked hard and we mixed a little faith and religion in, we were supposed to be successful. The people who weren't successful were the ones who weren't working hard enough or didn't have enough faith. And I couldn't figure this out. How could people who are working so hard and so faithful, how come they're not going to be taken care of? How come when the rice fails, they're going to starve? And I also grew up in a world where at church we would talk about saying prayers to find keys in parking spaces, right? So how come a God that's going to help me find my keys, that's going to help me find a parking spot at Costco, won't hear prayers for a village about water needed for their rice? And this bothered me, right? It bothered me a lot. I came back after my mission. I came here to BYU. I took a lot of classes, had a great time. I never really fully was able to understand what was going on or answer those questions, both intellectually and spiritually. Okay, fast forward about 6 years after I talked to Bishop Aguilara, I'm starting my first semester at a master's program. And I get one of those promptings. You know those promptings where like, you should go look for your keys on the kitchen table? Right? I get one of those promptings to say, I need to go look at my schedule, that there's a class I need to take. So I start going through the book and start looking for, because there's a book back then because I'm old, right? Looking through the book for classes, and I come across one that says the economic, political, and social development of community. And I think that sounds great, right? That also happened to be the very first sociology class I ever took. I was 26 years old, and a prompting on a whim, and I take this class, okay? Now, one of these gentlemen is an Ivy League professor, and the other is a Russian anarchist, right? But both of them are directly responsible for me being here today. Right? Tom Lyson was the professor of that class, and we read Peter Kropotkin's anarchist literature, and it was the coolest thing, right? It was new ways of looking at the world. And then we read other literature about exploitation and about how people aren't necessarily rational beings, and that sometimes they use power and privilege to oppress and don't care about small villages like Salapasa. Sociology was the first introduction that helped me explain the world that I'd seen and lived when I had other experiences in Southeast Asia and South Asia of exploitation. It allowed me to change that perspective, right, of just working hard and being faithful is enough, to expand in a world where there is exploitation, where things don't work out even if you work hard. It brought me to a whole new world that allowed me to explain the day-to-day lives, not just here in Utah, but the day-to-day lives of people throughout the world. Right? But I still hadn't had that spiritual understanding yet. So I had the intellectual expansion, but there still wasn't that justification to understand, well, how come you prompt me to take this class? How come you prompt me to find my keys, but you're not going to take care of that village? Right? So let's fast forward about 10 years after I take this class from Tom Lyson, and I'm actually doing sociology. Right? I finished my degree. I'm a professor. I get contracted to consult on a project on human trafficking in the Thai fishing industry. At the time, there was a genocide in Myanmar targeting the Rohingya population. They're a minority Muslim population. And so they were moving down from Myanmar into Thailand and were being caught up in the fishing industry. And due to global market pressures, a lot of them were being exploited for no pay or low pay or very dangerous work. And so the World Bank initially funded this to try to figure out, well, how bad is it? We're starting to understand, getting reports. There was reports, news stories in The Guardian and others about exploitations and deaths and other things. And so I was contracted to come in and use my sociology, use that expanded understanding of the world to try to figure out, how do we talk to people without getting them hurt? How do we understand what their lives look like, right? And I'm sitting on this dock in Songkhla, Thailand, and I take this picture right here where we're talking with local officials and others. And it's actually this boat back here. Had I known this experience would have happened, I would have reframed the photo, but this is the one we get. I'm sitting on this dock, right, and I'm thinking sociology. I'm thinking about how I take care of these people, thinking about the markers associated with someone who's being trafficked and someone who's a normal fisherman. And I see two fishermen, right, and they fit all the markers of trafficking. They're Rohingya, they are deckhands, and one of them's got a bottle of gin, and the other one's got a pack of cigarettes, and they are happy, right? They are super happy. And for a moment, I have a spiritual epiphany, and I see them how our Heavenly Parents see them. And they helped me recognize that our heavenly parents love and see everybody. And that for all those 15 years, what I thought was compassion was pity. I was looking down and saying, how come I have so much and they have so little? You should be blessing them, God, like I want them to be blessed. In that moment, I had this idea and this understanding of love, of divine love, that, hey, we've got this. We know them. We're there for them. And that beauty, that divinity, that numinous surrounds them at all times. But we just sometimes lack both the intellectual and spiritual paradigms and frameworks to be able to understand it. And I'm so grateful for those two experiences, right? Because this is what we're going to be talking about today, and this is the main take-home for the class, is that, or the lecture, right? Is that sometimes we start off our world and we have a paradigm, and we understand the world, and that might work in Orem, Utah, right? And it makes all the sense in the world in our existence. But through a study of sociology, we're able to expand our world, expand our understandings to realize it is very complicated, and there's so many people out there. We gain perspective, right? Our sociological perspectives allow us to see others in new lives. Just like I was able to start seeing exploitation and seeing the problems I'd lived with in South and Southeast Asia in a new light after I started reading things like Kropotkin and Wallerstein and Marx and Foucault, right? It helped me to first intellectually understand that. And once I had that intellectual expansion, then it could be illuminated with the numinous. And I like the word numinous because it's this ethereal divinity, right? It's always there, but sometimes I lack the perspective to be able to see it. And when we're able to combine our scholar and our discipleship, our world becomes this robust place where the divine is always with us and is always there for others. We gain compassion, we gain love, and a deeper understanding of the world around us and the people we are interacting with on a daily and regular basis. Okay, so this is the take-home, right? This is what I want you to remember, this amazing PowerPoint animation I spent a lot of time doing, right? That's the take-home for today. Now, I want to first of all go through this in a couple different settings. So first setting we're going to do to help highlight this idea is with the Savior, right? I love that we get to study the New Testament in Sunday school this year. It's my favorite because we get to see this one-on-one teaching. And when you layer on that sociological perspective, you see that a lot of Christ's teachings and parables are about things like race and gender and family and inequality. And to me, the Good Samaritan is a study of race, right? Hey, Lord, how do I get to heaven? Well, you got to love your neighbor. Well, who's my neighbor? Okay, hold on. Let me teach you about race. Okay, we have this really complicated setting here in Galilee. We have all these sects, we have all these countries, we have all these religions. All these people come together. You might think you know who your neighbor is, but let me tell you a little story. And that story about your neighbor is going to expand your world about that, right? And your understanding of who your neighbor is. Not only your neighbor is the person you may despise, but they're the good ones in that story, right? Completely changing the paradigm. Not just that we should tolerate other people, but they're the good ones, right? And how does the story end with Christ? Right? He says, who's the neighbor? Well, the one that showed mercy. And then Christ, at the end, in verse 37, says, then Jesus said unto him, go and do likewise. So in that moment, he expanded the understanding and then helped to infuse divine understanding to that. And the hope is, if we ever got like Good Samaritan 2.0, the follow-up, is we'd see that individual going out and understanding the world is more robust and more beautiful at the same time. That his understanding of the neighbor and his duty to love and care for them was much, much greater than before. And you can do this with other settings with the parable too. And it highlights that it's critical that we have an understanding of race. It's not radical to have an understanding about gender or inequality. Christ is doing this in the same way. And our sociological perspectives gives us a deeper insight into his teachings and what it means to be a disciple in our day and age. Okay? We're going to do one more example of this here with a contemporary one that if you're in my 340 classes, you'll be familiar with. Oh, see, animation. It's going to stick with you, right? So Christ explains it, right, understands it, and then we have this increased understanding and the ability to see the divinity and numinous around us. So this other example is, this is Amartya Sen. He's a Bengali Nobel laureate. He won his Nobel Prize talking about famines and food aid, okay? And he wrote this book about development as freedom, where he argues that poverty and being poor is more than an economic measure. Oftentimes when we think about poverty, our first reaction or personal understanding is to think a lack of income, a lack of food, a lack of some sort of economic well-being. But Sen says, no, it's so much more complicated than that. It's much more robust. For us to truly be happy, we need to have things like economic, political, social freedom. How are we treated by our others? Is our community protecting us? All that goes together to have a more robust, right, better understanding of what it means to be poor. Right? So then I have my sociological perspective here, right? I read Sen, expands my understanding. And then when we read things like Moses, right? And the Lord called his people Zion because they were of one heart and one mind and dwelt in righteousness, and there was no poor among them. That changes how we think about poor, right? I remember reading this for most of my life and just thinking, well, I guess Zion's a place where people just shared their food, right? And they all had a house. But if we think about what this means for us today, to try to have Zion here on BYU campus, that changes a lot. That means the poor, that's the students with anxiety, that they feel seen and supported. That the LGBTQ students on campus feel protected by our community. And that the Republican conservative students in sociology classes, yeah, their opinions matter too, and they feel comfortable sharing those opinions, right? It goes both ways on the way. We can't just exclude one group at the cost of another, right? So I love this. I love this about being a sociologist. We have this ability to really engage about the human element. And it inspires me. When I think about bringing Zion to campus, I'm so excited to think about there's so many people out there that need what I can help them with. And that there's so many people out there that can help me with what I need, right? And that together we can all bring about this more robust and more realistic Zion here on campus, okay? I want to go back to Salapossip for a second. So, weeks went by and there's still no rain. The farmers got better and more creative about how they were going to pump the water into their fields to keep the rice going. Ironic, I get dry mouth at the same time I'm saying this. Anyway, I grew up in Utah with family who were farmers, so I've done a lot of prayers about rain, right? But I was very, very grateful when the rain finally did come. And there was a harvest. It wasn't a great harvest, but there was enough. I'm sure many families had to go without, and that there were sacrifices, and there certainly wasn't surplus, but there was enough. The village got by. And I want to share this also because it was 15 plus years. 15 plus years where there was times where I was angry, times I didn't want to pray, times I didn't want to go to church, but I stayed, right? Not to brag, but I was the assistant to the president on my mission, right? I got married in the temple. I had to get interviewed twice by general authorities to come get a job here, right? All the time, those dilemmas, those problems were there. The disciple scholar understands it's a long, hard path, and that's okay. So if you're someone right now, especially the students who are struggling with the gospel because there's something you can't figure out or something that you're upset about, that's being a disciple. That's part of what it is. It's a long, hard road, and we don't know when it's going to be. But if we're continually thinking about how we can expand our understanding of the world and humanity, then we'll also be able to see the divinity in that as well, and it'll be there. So it's okay to not to know everything. We use that language often too much in our church, I think. It's okay to have questions. It's okay to not know things. We move forward with faith, hoping, searching, looking for the divine in our lives and in the people around us. So I like that idea with that. So when we think about this too, so I had this idea here where there's Salapossip, Ithaca, and Songkhla. Right? I had these moments that helped to transform who I was and really to become that disciple scholar. And you're going to have the same things too, right? You'll have these momentous occasions. You'll graduate from BYU. You'll start your career. And then, of course, you'll have that highlight moment of when you beat Cocaine Bear in the Mid-South semi-elite pickleball tournament, right? And in these individual moments, it's often where we can stop, pause, and reflect, right? And those sociological perspectives help us to understand what's going on. And then our discipleship and our prayer and our worship can help to infuse that too, to have better understanding. But here's the trick about life. Life and discipleship actually occurs in between. And that's when it gets hard. It's the day-to-day. So we need to create a fluency in these sociological perspectives, a fluency in discipleship that helps us get through the drudgery of every single day, right? After we're somewhere on these dashed lines, you're going to have an experience like this, right? You're going to be coming home from your job and you realize you won't have any food. So you fight traffic, you don't get to the grocery store, only to discover that everyone else in town doesn't have any food at home and went to the grocery store too. And you'll get in line and you'll start to complain, why are there only 2 checkers? And why that's clearly way too many items for the express lane. What's this dude doing, right? It's so easy on those day-to-day moments to lose sight of the expansive understanding of humanity and the divinity and the numinous that is a part of all of this too. So that's what I wanted to spend the next part is talking about how do we cultivate an ability to do that, right? It's similar like on a test. You might be able to cram for a midterm or a final and remember Durkheim and Weber, but where it really excels is when we allow sociology to permeate our day-to-day lived life. So our worldview, our understanding, the way we see and engage with others, even when we're tired, even when there's no more Coke Zero left at the grocery store and life is coming to an end, right? This is when we need to have that fluency in our sociology and our discipleship. And so I want to propose to you one way to doing that is to cultivate compassionate curiosity. Okay? And so I want to talk about, first of all, the curiosity part. Sociology is a wonderful field to do that. So I looked up in the American Sociological Society, there's 53 sections. I randomly pulled this graph to show you the percentage of students in the different sections, if that's of interest, or you can see all the old faculty are in the history of sociology, which seems appropriate given the title of it. But it's very broad. You can learn lots of things. I love that sociology has everything in it, from gender to occupations to population. There's so much that we can do here, and that's part of what you need to actively go about. Curiosity is a muscle, right? We can strengthen it, or it can atrophy. So we need to look for opportunities to go and study new things that are going to change the way we're going to look at. Find those Russian anarchists, right? Read things you wouldn't have done before. I want to challenge all the students here to take what I'm going to call an outlier class. Go through the catalog and find a class you know nothing about and take it. You're lucky. The sociology department here is full of phenomenal teachers. You will not have a bad experience. They actually have to create new statistics for our department because somehow we're all above average faculty. But I strongly encourage you to do it because those classes, those outlier classes, those are the ones I still remember. Those are the ones that stick with me decades later. Even if it's not central to my job, those new ways of looking at it really have helped me stretch and expand my understanding of the world. So take a chance and take a class that you normally wouldn't take, and I guarantee it will pay huge dividends for you. If you're not doing it here in your studies, then do it on your own. Find books. Here's 3 examples of books that I read literally because they seem so bizarre and so different than anything else I've read, and each one of them rocked my world in a new way. Kafka on the Shore deals with gender and cultural issues in Japan. The Famished Road is poverty and like religion and spiritualism in Nigeria. The 7 Moons of Maali Amalidid is the new Booker Award winner. It's phenomenal, deals with gender and genocide and everything going on in the Sri Lankan Civil War. None of these books are like, you know what is me? The Famished Road. That's totally who I am. But it was an opportunity to stretch, and they've really helped me to see the world and try to better understand people and places and living lives like Stolopasov, right? Different. My paradigm doesn't understand it. I've got to spend some time to grow, to really understand what someone else's world experience is like, and then infuse it with the gospel too. Okay, so we've got to consciously cultivate curiosity, right? Because what we often have is our paradigms are insufficient for the question that we may confront. And this is a challenge right now, because in our society right now, in this post-truth world, confidence is seen as a strength. I'm not wrong. I'm so right, I'm going to say the thing even louder this time. And we build barriers around our paradigms because we want to be right. And we'll go to our echo chambers, and they'll reinforce that we're right. It is a radical concept this day and age to reconsider our position, right? So be a rebel, right? Be brave and courageous enough to reconsider your position. We may not know everything. we may not have a full understanding, and we need to challenge ourselves to be constantly looking at, why is my crazy uncle at Thanksgiving talking about those things? Clearly, I'm not understanding his lived experience. They have a different way of looking at things. I need to push my boundaries. I'm not saying you accept it, I'm saying we understand it. And that's really crucial, is that once we draw those barriers, we judge and we lose curiosity. We need to be always open for this opportunity to be brave and to challenge what we think we know already, right? Who were you 10 years ago? Do you want to be that same person, right? You're a radically different person now. You're going to be a much, much different person in 10 years too. And this is how we do it, is recognizing we're growing. And when we confront a question we don't quite understand, we're missing something. We need to understand that even deeper. Okay. When we have that curiosity, we can then fuse it with compassion. And that's what I want to talk about next, is how we take this divine love, this divine compassion, and we fuse it with our curiosity, because then it becomes even more. Then we're engaging with our eternal brothers and sisters. We're dealing with the divine. For me, growing up, when we talk about the divine and eternal love, it was often this temporal kind of idea, right? That our heavenly parents love us, and they've loved us since the pre-earth life. They love us now, and they love us for eternity. What I want you to do today, I want you to challenge and to think about this in another way, right? We're cultivating our curiosity, and if we can think about love not as a measure of time, but as depth, right? Our heavenly parents know and love everything about us. Right? And that's the kind of compassion we need to cultivate towards others, to see deeply into them and understand others and love them for where they are. Our heavenly parents know how hard we try, right? I see it with my students too. I know how hard you try. And they know that sometimes, despite our best efforts, we're just sad. Things are hard. And our heavenly parents love us, and they want us to keep going. And they know that there's things that we're deeply ashamed of, things we bury deep down inside, and we feel if anyone would find out about it, then they wouldn't want to be our friends. They wouldn't accept us. But our heavenly parents know that, and they love us. And that's that deep measure of infinite love, right? That's that deep compassion that, when combined with our curiosity, allows us to see a world full of the divine in those around us and in the communities around us too. And this was echoed earlier. Peter Johnson, in a devotional last November, said this too, right? He said that our Heavenly Father knows our names, knows our personalities. He knows our weaknesses and strengths, right? Sometimes I forget that the things I'm ashamed of, the things that I feel are weak, that I don't want you to know about, my Heavenly Parents know that, and they love me, and they accept me for that. And that is the love I desperately need. I may not deserve it, but I desperately need it. And I desperately want to give that to other people because I know personally how much that's needed. Right? So that's this idea of compassion combined with our curiosity, right? Promise is the last time you're going to see this amazing, unless you want the slides, right? You can get this and use it for family home meeting, right? So we cultivate this compassionate curiosity. We are able to see people more broadly, and then we fuse it with that divine love. Then that's just a real deep meaning. Think about those relationships, those people, those places where that's happened for you, right? And that's the possibility we have on the day-to-day life. Not just when we beat Cocaine Bear and pickleball, right? It's when we're here, stuck in line. We have the opportunity to think about, man, I wonder what this guy is doing. Maybe he's got a sick grandma and he's getting all these groceries for her. What a wonderful person, right? We sometimes have to think to the absurd to be able to recognize that there's divinity and there's beauty in the people and the world around us. Okay, I want to just last thing here is that in those moments, like the grocery store here, sometimes the hardest part is to remember to be kind, to remember to be compassionate. We all go to church on Sunday, we're feeling really good about ourselves. Monday, we get that email at 7:30 a.m. in the morning, and we're just cussing up a storm in the rest of the week. Or that's me, right? You're better than that, right? But I wanted to do this because Robin Wall Kimmer, she wrote Braiding Sweet Glass, and she talks about rituals, right? And that the elders in her tribe, our rituals are there to remember. And I love that, right? I love that if I build in rituals into my life, it helps me to remember to be good and loving to other people, right? So I'm going to share with you one of my rituals that helps me do this, and then suggest one to you, okay? So my ritual is this. I love this. I'm going to try not to cry because I do love this painting so much. I'm sorry. Vermeer's Little Street, okay? So Vermeer at the time, I love this painting. At the time, painters were only looking at deities and leaders and royalty. Those were the people who were worthy of being painted. And Vermeer looks at this little street where there's this house that's clearly had better days, people just doing the everyday things, nothing spectacular, just being a person. And he says, you know what, that is beautiful, and that is wonderful, and that is worthy of praise. Just the day-to-day living of it. And what I also love about Vermeer is he was known for bringing in light. We can't really see it so much here, but he was able to take light and capture and highlight things. And so if you see this in person, this woman here is illuminated, right? And she's just doing something simple. And that reminds me to remember that there's beauty in the everyday. And the everyday common person, the person like houses like this that have seen better days, people who've seen better days, are worthy of our praise, are worthy of our love. And that we need to try to find how we can bring that light in to help illuminate them and remind us of their worth and value, right? So I love this painting. And again, every time I see it, I'm reminded of this, and I fail at this. I guarantee I've sworn at somebody in this room driving down 9th East, because I will see this painting, and then I'll get in a car, and my kids are here. They'll tell you the stories, and I forget to remember, right? So that's my ritual. I have this in my office, and I think about this way too much, but I love this painting because it reminds me to try to have more Christ-like compassion, to use those sociological perspectives and see the numinous in the world around me. So this is the ritual I want to encourage you to do, right? This is the Cougar Creamery, right? Or the Cougar Eat. Okay, you ready? Vermeer's little street, Cougar Eat, right? It's so bad you won't be able to forget it, right? That's part of why I did that, okay? But next time you're in you go by the Taco Bell, take that moment to pause, to remember. All the people there waiting for their food, whether it's at Chick-fil-A or at Taco Bell, they're divine. They're beautiful. They're wonderful, right? We have this ability to see the world more fully. We can cultivate a deeper love for the gordita, if that's possible, right? But we walk past this on a regular basis. And how wonderful it is if we could just pause and remember that our training here as sociologists is helping us to see the world more broadly so that we can be infused with the light of Christ. Right? It is my sincere hope and prayer that we can all become disciple scholars and help to bring about Zion here on campus. And I leave this with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. Okay, there's a number of faculty who have been so gracious to delay their classes. So if you're in one of those classes, we'll pause right now and let you all go to your class, and then we'll take a few questions after that. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so we've got time, a few minutes here for any questions and answers. If you have a question, I'm happy to try to answer them. Yeah, Ryan. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very emotional. This is really special.
Yeah, right.
So, one question is, when you saw the two traffickers near the boat,
Yeah.
what was your initial thought, and was that contrasted by the spiritual experience that you had? Because that, for me, I would look at those two traffickers and be like, oh, that's what we want to fight on, that's what we want to stop.
Yeah.
And then it's like evil versus good.
Yeah.
How was that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So she's asking in the moment on Songkla where I saw the traffickers and had that experience. I think why it was so profound for me, I'll explain the experience and then maybe the next step about how I look at development work. We were there and everything was about fear because I was so worried about, like, people were literally being killed and beaten with the trafficking. And so we were there, and we were there to try to make sure that we could do this safely, to find out what the workers needed, how bad the problem was, where was the problem. But we also knew that a bunch of white people showing up on a dock might cause problems for the workers. And so that was about the third day where we were visiting little fishing villages all around Thailand in like completely tinted out van windows. That was the first time we got out of the van. Because the government officials wanted to take pictures with us. I don't know. Anyway, but it was 3 days of fear trying to think about, because it was my job to figure out how we contact the fishermen and how do we do that safely so we can have the interviews with them. And so all that fear, and then this, I mean, like, you don't start out with a general conference talk with gin and cigarettes, right? But there was this moment where it was a complete shift of that, like, peace and love. You know, you feel like at the temple or those spiritual moments you've had in your life that really galvanize your testimony. It was an instant shift where almost like, I don't go too far as like parting the veil, but it was that like real of like, this is how we see them. We love them. We are there for them. And just that, and it wasn't very long, right? Just that 5 seconds of going from fear to that pure divine love was just something special and was a prayer that I've been asking for 15 years to understand what's going on, right? How I go about with work is just kind of like this, even the idea with Zion. I've done interviews where I've talked about these things and people think, isn't that terrible that you're studying all these like awful things? And I'm always optimistic because we need to know the problem before we can fix it, right? So the better I understand what's going on in Thailand, the better I understand the poverty in South Provo, the better I understand what students are being left out on campus, the better I can be at helping that, right? Because the desire is there, and I think that's what I love being at BYU is we don't have to convince you to try to help the world. Like, you want to. Your students are here, and they're just asking, how do we do this better? And so that's why I love my job as a sociologist, because it's that. It's like, let's figure out how do we do this better, and then we unleash a room of BYU undergrads, and then it's going to be fixed in a weekend, right? So does that help answer that? Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, McKay.
Scott, how do we, so certainly we're in this moment where you said confidence and I am right, I have to be right. How do we start making curiosity or the numinous more attractive, or being lost more attractive, rather than being, you have to be this or you won't survive?
So let me say how I've seen that on campus, right, in my classrooms. And maybe that will help with the macro issue. People want to be seen and heard. And I think a lot of times the time where people double down on it is because they don't feel there's a need there. And there's a need that they don't feel is being seen or addressed. And I feel like when I'm able to be curious and genuinely curious, not just like, oh, I've got to check this box and ask you a question about why you like Trump. I know you don't, but I'm just, but I think if we have that deep, deep curiosity, like a genuine curiosity, people want to talk. They want to be seen. I've seen that when I've done work in rural towns, right, where the American dream was promised to them and then they felt like they were cheated. Like, there's legitimate reasons why they were supporting Trump and why they have feelings about the coal industry, right? And they want to be heard. They want to be seen. And if you're honest, and I think that opens it up. It's that dialogue that we have with other social issues of people thinking everyone's that way and everyone's that way. And then, oh, wait, there's this one good one. Maybe I'll start talking. Oh, actually, there's a handful of really good ones. Oh, actually, you know what? Everyone's actually pretty cool. So I think that it's not easy. It's not like we can just, I don't know how we do that on a macro scale, but that's how I try to do it on an individual level. Because the thing about curiosity, if we're honestly curious, we never get to judgment. We're always wanting to learn more about that person, and then we have a deeper relationship and a more meaningful relationship. And like there's so many people we have in our lives that we love that have different political or social views, and we engage with them and love with them at other ways. And we try to make those real meaningful relationships. And the moment they become artificial or just for show, the other person knows it too, and then that's where that rigidly, see, I told you you're just that way here. But I think it's that genuine, honest curiosity and love of the other. And maybe we have to work really, really hard before we find something where we can genuinely connect, but I think that's how we go about doing it. Did that help answer that? Yeah, Jensen.
If you were to be back in that village in the Philippines and someone approached you and said, look at our brown, dry crop, how could God let this happen? How would you phrase your response now, given the insights?
That's a good question. That's going to be the final on 340 now. I think I'll let you all answer that. I think how I would go about doing it is how I've dealt with other struggles I've had in the church. And that there's these big issues, right? These big macro issues that I may not agree with or I may not fully understand, and they're problematic on the outside. But what's kept me in the church is my individual relationship with deity. That I know that there's heavenly parents who love me. And then that there's a community that I get to interact with, and that I love them, and that I get to serve them. I may not understand everything. I may not understand why the crop is failing or what's going to happen to the village, but I have that individual relationship, and I would encourage people to try to do that too. And I think that's it. We all have our, if we want to use the metaphorical, drying rice. There's some struggle that's big, it's hard, it's public, it's visible. But if we go down to our personal discipleship, our personal relationships, those are real, those are meaningful, and on a day-to-day basis, I find lots of value and love with them. And that's what you saw with Bishop Aguilar in that village, to be honest. They rolled with it. It was more of a problem for me. That was part of their day-to-day lives. That's that pity coming in, right? It wasn't the first time the crop didn't come in strong. And they had more faith in the divine than I did, and probably still do. Okay, let's do last question.
You've mentioned this in the sector as well as in class before, but having a sociological perspective can be quite depressing because you're being open to different perspectives in your own. How do you deal with the small efforts that we are doing into victory instead of having the single-handedly change the world come when we're trying to go and address the issues?
That's such a great question. I am going to cite my brilliant, wonderful partner, because we were talking about this before, and I think this perfectly helps to answer this. She was helping give me feedback on this. So when we talk about that expansive framework, right, I think the poverty example we talked about before is a great one. When we look at poverty, we're often looking at a deficit framework. What's missing, who's not being heard, right? We also need to understand asset frameworks. What's there, what's the benefit, what's the change, what's the good, right? And I think for me, that's where I get hung up in grocery stores and driving in cars. I start getting upset because I'm stuck in that deficit way of looking at it, because that's often a very sociological way. We're concerned about who's not, about equity, who isn't having the right, where's the problem? But also for the compassionate side and having a broad theoretical framework, we also need to have that asset mindset. We need to recognize, I have done this. This has been a change. There is positive as well. And we need both tools, right? Or else we get stuck. It's the same thing with me being stuck in that pity cycle, right? We can be stuck in a deficit mindset where all we see is the negative, all we see is the insufficiencies, and we don't see all the positive changes as well. And that might be harder, right? That might be hard, and there's those up and downs with it. But I think that's what's crucial, is to see that there is positive change, right? We are getting better as humanity. And that may just be in our room, in this room, and with our family, but I think overall you see more beauty, more love. Like, that's why I love that Vermeer, because it reminds me everywhere around me is a masterpiece, right? It gets me back in that asset mindset, and that's why I get emotional about it, because I do go to that. With my sociological training, especially the critical theory training I had in grad school, is all deficit, critical, what's wrong. And I forget to remind myself there's so much beauty, there's so much good in the world, and I have to pause, look at a Dutch masterpiece, and then reset myself. Okay. All right, there's refreshments, which are vastly superior to any more questions. So let's go do that. Thank you, everyone, and I'm always happy to talk with you individually as well.